absolutely think that Donald Trump was responsible for what happened on January 6th. He could have prevented it and didn't so, and should have.
I couldn't believe that was our people doing that in the Capitol. Not just Americans, but also people who would, be conservatives, Republicans. I was just shocked to see that.
I saw firsthand on TV what took place on January 6th, 2021. And I could not believe that I was living in a country that was actually trying to be overthrown and taken from the American voters.
I also feel that the January 6th insurrection was something that I, for one, am glad that my father, who was a veteran of World War II, was not alive to see that. It would have broken his heart. My husband and my husband is a 30-year Army retired veteran from Vietnam and Desert Storm. It broke our hearts to see that, and we both cried. I was saddened to see the pushback from some of the media that really it wasn't an insurrection. I don't care what you call it. It was just plain horrible.
January 6th came and we saw what he did. And no, that was not a group of tourists just wanting to visit the Capitol. They were wanting to have their voice heard in a pretty violent way. It just disturbed me greatly that could be happening.
Trump's behavior on January 6th was appalling. As a former veteran of the United States Air Force, we took an oath to the Constitution to protect the Constitution against foreign and domestic enemies. To tell the January 6th protesters that we love you was just too much.
But then January 6th, that was the final straw for me. That at that point, I even posted on social media. I'm like, I renounce my support for Trump. Trump is a danger to our republic. We've seen that. I mean, what other presidents have incited an insurrection on the Capitol? Even some of the worst presidents like Buchanan and Pierce didn't do that.
He's the one that drove action towards the Capitol. He drew his followers in to fight against what was a valid and legal election. That, to me, is a dereliction of duty. His job as the president of the United States is defend our Constitution and defend the democracy.
When the insurrection happened on January 6th, it was almost surreal. As I saw it happening in front of my eyes, I could not believe what was going on. To see him say awful things about Mike Pence and to let the people talk about killing him, and nothing was done to stop that. That is wrong.
The United States was looked at as the beacon of that peaceful transfer of power. And that, to me, was destroyed on January 6th. And I think the main cause of that was Donald Trump.
January 6th made me sick to my stomach. Trump egged that on. We're going to walk down to the Capitol building, and you got to fight like hell if you want your country anymore. And then they started chanting, hang Pence, hang Pence. And he did nothing about it. He sold out Pence to better himself. He's that selfish.
And everything that I knew in my heart was going to happen that day played out live. And I watched it with my own eyes. And for anyone that says, well, it was manufactured, they did some editing, I'm telling you right now, I watched it live. I knew it was going to happen, and then it happened. And then for a further, whatever it was, 4.5 hours, 5 hours, our commander-in-chief did nothing. President Trump will tell you, well, I sent out these tweets and he's trying to do this for his visionist history. But again, I remember that day. It is seared into my brain, into my soul. And I will never, ever forgive Donald Trump for the actions and inactions that he took against our country and our democracy. It's disgusting.
January 6th was a shameful, disgraceful day for our democracy. And I do hold Donald Trump responsible for the attempted insurrection on that day. I believe that his anger and his stubborn refusal to accept the outcome of the election fueled the fire that a former president would not be interested in, let alone protect. A peaceful transfer of power was a despicable all-time low.
I think Trump was the founder of that whole January 6th episode. And to me, he's not even an American. He ought to be kicked out of the country, if you ask me.
January 6th and how that was handled. He's on tape. He's on video stating basically rush the Capitol. As a president, as a political person that should have never happened. Not only should it have never happened, he should have said, okay, this is getting out of hand. Let's stop it. He never did that. Now, I can understand doing a march to the Capitol or march to a place, but to then start destroying it and then hurting the people that are protecting that building. One, that's a violation of the Constitution right there. Now they're calling them hostages, and I can't even believe that happened, whatever. I can't even.
January 6th, for me, was a disgrace, quite frankly. All the other presidents that I have been alive for and old enough to watch, when they transferred power, they accepted the process and they peacefully had a transfer of power. That's not what Trump did. He rallied his troops, so to speak, to have an insurrection. He got mad at his vice president for, not doing the things that Trump thought he should do. And even after he had members of his staff, high-ranking members of staff, say they didn't steal the votes, we lost. But Trump couldn't handle that.
So as far as January 6th goes, of course, like any normal person, we were just expecting that hopefully he'll get out there quickly and call these people off. And the more and more it went off, and I kept reading these posts about he's been contacted, he's not doing anything to stop it. I'm like, how can he let this continue? And so at that time, that's where I said, okay, I'm done.
His actions affected me on January 6th are profound. Number one, it looked like I and everybody else that I know saw the entire world saw us turn into a banana republic at the direction and control of Donald Trump. I'm sure he was gleefully excited on what he watched, while the rest of the entire world watched in horror. And the country hasn't been the same.
When I think about January 6th and the speech that Donald Trump made and the actions and inactions that Donald Trump took or didn't take on January 6th, I can't help remembering what my brother said that afternoon. A Vietnam vet, twice decorated, but on January 6th, as the riot engulfed the Capitol, my brother called me up and very angrily said, "That man is dead to me." And by that, he didn't mean physically. He meant he was done with President Trump, that this entire mess on January 6th was Donald Trump's responsibility. And he failed. He utterly failed.
The events of January the 6th was the last nail in the coffin for any respect or support I have for Trump. I do remember later that evening watching the news, and I thought to myself, what is this country coming to? How in the world could this happen? Disbelief that Americans would do that, and above all, that Republicans would do that.
As things were getting destroyed, offices were getting broken into, people were getting hurt, he didn't lift a damn finger to call off that mob. To me, the blame rests solely on his shoulders for that, because he was the man with the power to stop it. Honestly, he was the man with the power that started it too. He started the fire, he should have put it out immediately. But no, instead he sat by, and I'm sure he even smiled sitting there watching this chaos ensue on the Capitol.
When I sit in my living room, I'm sorry, I get upset over this, and watched law enforcement officers being kicked and pummeled with American flagpoles, and even some of them have died from this. And the Trump camp has remained silent and has not even apologized. And when they finally convinced him to end the nightmare, he went on television. He said, "We love you. You're wonderful people. Go home and be in peace." I'm like, wonderful people? Really? I was so upset.
Regarding January 6th, I may be somewhat biased in having been a police officer and having worked my way through college and law school as a state law enforcement officer. I was amazed to see citizenry running over the Capitol, injuring police officers, breaking into federal buildings, trying to find people to lynch. He refused to decry this. He refused to denounce it. He refused to do that until it had been going on for hours, in the vain attempt to have somehow this mass threat change our democracy. And that's been the hallmark of dictators around the world for centuries.
January 6th for me was kind of like a sucker punch. I guess I was in denial a lot and just thought, okay, our country has it together and we're going to be fine and we're going to move on from this. And January 6th was kind of like, this is not the party that I thought we had when Donald Trump, threw his vice president under the bus. That was when, like, being sick to my stomach.
When January 6th happened and I saw it live on TV, I happened to be home that day. And I remember texting my husband, like, this is crazy. I kept thinking Trump should be stopping them, but he's not. The fact that he was sitting there for hours not doing anything and just letting them go. And I thought, are you kidding me? Without a doubt, Trump was responsible for what happened on January 6th.
January 6th, I can't get past that. That's when I totally broke from the Republican Party. I couldn't believe what I was watching. I felt like our country was being treated like some banana republic. And it was clear to me that Trump was responsible. It was Trump supporters that were involved, and it made me sick to my stomach.
The events of January 6th, inviting all those people there, knowing they had guns, knowing they had weapons, sitting in his dining room and refusing to take phone calls from all kinds of generals and people who were trying to make him come out and tell these people to leave. I'm incensed about January 6th.
I completely 100% hold him accountable for the insurrection of the Capitol. Mr. Trump invited those people. This was an insurrection, and it was led by Donald Trump. He needs to be incarcerated for this.
I cannot vote for Donald Trump because he epitomizes the worst of the people that we are. I saw this on January 6, 2021, when he incited an insurrection. And I don't need a court of law to tell me that. I know what I saw on the live news feed. What we saw was a riot, an insurrection, people causing destruction, death, using bear spray on cops, beating police officers. So I know what I saw. And I don't need a court of law to tell me what I saw. That's the red line for me as far as ever voting for Donald Trump.
January 6th. The way he handled it, or should I say didn't handle it. I was watching it live on the news and I was horrified at what I was seeing. These people just storming the Capitol and the violence that was starting to happen. I was horrified. And I felt like on January 6th, Trump had that rally and he said he was going to march with the people to the Capitol, which he did not do. He went back to the White House, I think. And this thing went on for a few hours before he even called for peace. And I feel in my heart of hearts that he was in the White House loving every minute of it.
And January 6th is a disgrace, a stain on our history. We can't elect a man like that who doesn't respect the Constitution.
January 6th really kind of broke my spirit. Anybody that participated in the January 6th insurrection, they have a level of personal accountability that they need to take responsibility for. But if there is somebody that is leading the world, like Donald Trump, telling you, hey, go do this, people are easily influenced. A person by themselves can make good moral judgments. People as a collective sometimes don't. And unfortunately, that's what happened because of some of the things that Donald Trump did and said.
Donald Trump was 100% responsible for January 6th. He allowed it to happen. And then after the fact, when it boiled up, he had the opportunity to avoid it, to turn the crowd away and refocus on values of the United States. And Donald Trump failed. He stoked the fire. And then he went and tried to hide it.
To see him really encouraging people to go through and, walk up to that Capitol building, take over, search yourself. We've got the rights to do this. That kind of stuff is just not at all what our country is about.
The biggest impact that January 6th had on me as a Christian, as a voter, as a Republican, as a conservative, I've always been a massive fan of Mike Pence. When I discovered that as they're chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," that he said, well, maybe that's what should happen. And I'm paraphrasing there. That pretty much writ it off for me. That was the moment where I said, I cannot vote for someone who's willing to allow murder or condone murder of their own vice president on the basis that it might buy him some more time in power. That is so far gone. January 6th was probably the turning point day for me when it comes to voting for Trump. There's no defending what happened there. And yet, Trump tries to defend it all the time. In fact, not only tries to defend it, tries to paint it as a glorious thing.
The man literally fomented and directed an insurrection against the very moment we were certifying an election. This was not done just any given day, any given time. I watched it all with my students live, and I watched the gallows. I watched the people screaming, "Hang Mike Pence." And I watched and waited for the statement from the White House with my classes. I kept telling my classes, he's going to say something. He's got to say something. And the entire 90-minute class, there was nothing. And after that, there was nothing. We all watched it as a country together. We know what it was.
Watching how the people that were inside the Capitol working that day had to fear for their life because you don't know what these individuals that are coming in have with them. And the fact is that Trump sat around for 3 to 4 hours and didn't tell people to leave, didn't say anything. That put a lot of people in harm's way, a lot of good people.
The January 6th event was, quite devastating for our country. I believe a lot of people were there, people that care about our country, but yet I think they were deceived and led to react in a way that is totally inappropriate. And I think what's most frustrating is that President Trump had the opportunity to tone things down, to get control of the situation, and yet he declined to do it. And ever since then, he still seems to deny that he didn't have that ability. But it's quite apparent in my mind that he could have prevented that whole thing if he only would have acted.
Here we have a sitting president that basically incites a riot on the grounds of the United States Capitol and endangers many lives, resulting in injuries to, I think, 150 Capitol police officers. I myself am a former police officer, so that's pretty personal to me.
January 6th was the end of Donald Trump for me. I could not believe what was happening before my eyes, watching what was an insurrection at the Capitol, which was, in my mind, unquestionably led by Donald Trump. I think what Donald Trump did on January 6th was dangerous for multiple reasons. Number one, he put the lives of police officers, congressional leaders, and military personnel at the end of the day in jeopardy. And it was a total repudiation of the Constitution and American standing in the world as far as I'm concerned.
My reaction on January 6th was one, I think more of anything is sadness. I mean, I felt really bad for the country. I felt like those people had been deceived greatly by their leader. I think he used those people. He committed treason that day against our country.
I believe the events of January 6th were a travesty in our country. And I do believe that it was incited by Donald Trump because he was adamant that he was not going to give up the presidency based on the votes. Vice President Pence did exactly as he was asked to do in the Constitution. And to ask someone to violate the Constitution to further your own end is not acceptable. Donald Trump did encourage people to march to the Capitol. He did nothing to stop the people who were breaking into the Capitol and committing crimes. He had plenty of time to do so, and he chose not to.
A turning point for me was Jan 6. I watched the news feed. I saw, it saying that people were encouraging him to speak up and stop the violence. But from everything I could see, it's something he wanted, and that really soured me.
The actions on January 6th shows that the man should not be president. He stated that he thought the way to prevent stolen elections was to change the Constitution or terminate it. He took an oath. The same oath I took, to defend the Constitution of the United States. Now he wants to terminate it because he didn't get his way, like a little kid that he is. It's obvious he's responsible for that violence that took place that day. He egged people on. He could have stopped that. He didn't support our law enforcement people. He could have stopped it, kept them from getting hurt, but no, he didn't do it. He's a coward.
It was sad being prime military to hear the people storming the Capitol on January 6th being called patriots. That is not what patriotism is.
They tried an insurrection. And anyone who will tell you that it was a peaceful demonstration, I've heard that from some of the Trumpers. Oh, they just wanted to take a tour. People who take a tour don't come in with handcuffs and tear gas and use weapons against cops trying to get in and bash in the windows of the Capitol. I blame former President Trump 100%. He used terms like, we're going to fight like hell. He even said, I'm going to march to the Capitol with you.
And what happened in the Capitol was one of the worst things. And of course, Trump was responsible for that too. He was doing everything he can to maintain his position and to hold his position as president, despite the fact that he was not qualified to do it any longer. But he didn't care. All he cared was, I want to remain there and I want to do whatever I want for my thinking, and the heck with everybody else.
January 6th is probably one of the worst things that ever happened to America. And the fact that the Republican Party and the fact that the cult of Trump can follow him and still claim to be patriots at the same time just sickens me.
January 6th. I mean, that is just an unforgivable act. You can't ever have someone who contests our fair and free elections, especially the fact that so many federal judges refuted his claims of unfair elections. That's just un-American, it's undemocratic, and it's dangerous to the future of our country.